Is curiosity important in professional sales? Is it important in life? Of course it is. You've heard us say 100 times on this podcast that curiosity is the key component during discovery, where the client or prospect will feel literally that we actually care about them achieving a better outcome for their business. Turns out curiosity makes us feel good. It actually releases the enzyme dopamine, which is the pleasure enzyme, makes us feel great when we eat a wonderful meal or even enjoy sex. So curiosity is really good for us. Curiosity is a critical success factor in business. In fact, a quote from today's book that we're going to review, next to integrity and trust, my curiosity and willingness to encourage my colleagues to challenge the status quo was one of the most critical characteristics that propelled us to whatever success we were fortunate enough to experience. Now, that quote came from Keith Krach, who actually wrote the foreword to this book. And Keith, of course, is the founder of DocuSign and Ariba. And Ariba ended up with a $40 billion market cap. So whatever success we were fortunate enough to enjoy, Keith enjoyed a lot of success. And Keith was writing about cracking the curiosity code, the key to unlocking human potential by Dr. Diane Hamilton. And Diane's our guest today. Just an amazing conversation about curiosity. And we learned that, of course, as infants or children, curiosity is everything. We have an abundance of it. That's how we learn and grow and develop. But over time, things get in the way and there are barriers preventing our curiosity. But it's so important for personal and professional success. Diane shares with us the 4 factors that get in the way: fear, assumptions, technology, either overuse of technology or underuse, and even the environment, the messages we hear, the stories we're told. And Diane is an expert on this. In fact, she's a sought-after expert in curiosity, perception, emotional intelligence, behavioral science. She's got 4 decades of real-world experience, and she's written 5 books. And today, we're talking about one of those books. She's amazingly recognized in this field. She was actually named to the Global Leader Today's list of top leaders. Other people on that list: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and Sheryl Sandberg. What company? She was also listed as one of the 200 biggest voices in leadership and in the top 10 most powerful women leaders in HR. I really enjoyed my conversation with Diane today. I'm sure you will too. And by the way, cracking the curiosity code should be required reading in professional sales and maybe in business. If you like today's podcast as much as I do, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast, because it really matters to us. And that's actually how we get great guests like Dr. Diane Hamilton. And here she is. Hey, Diane, welcome to the Selling Well podcast. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, I'm super excited to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to chat with you. Today, we're going to be talking about cracking the curiosity code. And Diane, the folks who listen to our podcast have heard me go on ad infinitum about the importance of curiosity and authentic curiosity in professional sales. Right. It's not about us. It's always about the person we're speaking to and just having that authentic curiosity. But you've got an amazing background. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing the short story of your kind of journey, your professional journey that led you to writing this book.
Well, I come from a sales background for sure. So
nice.
Decades of sales. I've sold everything from computers, software to mortgage loans, you name it. I was in pharmaceutical sales for a long, long time.
Wow.
And so, I mean, there's just so much that you do that is impacted by your sales background, which is wonderful. But, you know, when I worked in pharmaceuticals, I worked for AstraZeneca. Actually, I worked in their ag chem division for almost 4 or 5 years, and then another 15 years in their pharmaceutical sales. And I learned a lot from that experience. But one of the things I got out of it was they paid for my master's, which was wonderful. And so I never really wanted a master's, never thought about it, never occurred to me to even go back. But I'm thinking, if they're going to pay for it, I'll certainly get one. And after I got it, I just really loved education and learning new things. And so I went back just to see how hard it would be to get a PhD. That was my whole goal, just to see how the challenge behind
just to see how hard it would be.
Yeah. And I fell in love with online education in the process, because I did my entire bachelor's at night, and you work for 8 to 4 or 5 or whatever, and then you go to a school from 7 to 10 at night. You want to shoot yourself. So I loved online education, and I wanted to teach in that realm, because I thought I want to help other people not have to do what I had to do. And so that got me into online education. I've been in that coming on 15, 20 years. I don't even know. I've taught thousands of online courses because I love it so much. And I ended up as the MBA program chair at the Forbes School of Business, which is out of the University of Arizona here in Arizona. And it was a really great experience. But when I left, I thought I wanted to try to do something. I still work for them part-time. I actually teach for a bunch of different universities that have online departments.
Oh, okay.
So I've taught thousands of courses, and I love it. But I wanted to develop my consulting and speaking business. And so when I went out on my own, I did so many different boards. I work on a lot of different boards, from DocuSign. I was on their board of advisors, I should say, and different companies like Radius AI and technology companies, and just so many wonderful things. And so when what I do is, I guess I learn things and I share what I learn. That's kind of what I do for a living. But my main thing is, I have my consulting and media business. And like you, I had a show like this that's on hiatus right now because I'm doing shows for some other people. But I have mostly I work with organizations to help them build curiosity. And I created the Curiosity Code Index and wrote the book that you held up that goes along with that. And it's the first assessment that determines the factors that inhibit curiosity, which is pretty exciting because you have to know what stops you to get better.
How interesting in terms of that journey. The journeys on this show are just fantastic, and I'm sure you experienced the same thing. The list of the guests you had on your show is flabbergasting, as is the list of the testimonials for the book. So everybody's provided an amazing testimonial, but you mentioned being on the board of DocuSign with Keith Crack, who actually did the foreword to the book, and he's right. Such a fan of yours as well.
I'm a fan of his.
The interesting thing about that journey that I really liked, Diane, and a little bit of alignment, I as well did an executive MBA. So I did one where, I'd been in my career for a while. I'd had a little bit of success, some modest success. I thought in my own mind, I wanted to become a CEO, thought I had a bit of a gap in terms of financial acumen, and ended up doing an executive MBA, which is, evenings, weekends. Yeah. You go and spend some time in school while working.
Right.
And the one thing, reading your book, the one thing that really jumps out at me is it was that experience for me that actually, I'd say, reinvigorated my curiosity. So right. Up to that point in time, kind of up into my low 30s, had some success. So thought I was having success because of my inherent capabilities, almost Carol Dweck, bit of a fixed mindset, saying I'm pretty good at this, but it's because of my inherent capabilities. And then I went to the MBA school to try and come back and maybe become a CEO. And then I realized all I want to do is sales. It's the only thing that's important in a business. It's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But it triggered this lifelong learning and this desire to keep growing. And it's the fact I love doing this podcast, is speaking to people like you to continually learn. So let's zip around to the book. So cracking the curiosity code. A couple of things that are really interesting. At the beginning of the book, you do talk about, you're trying to pursue this topic to understand, where do people fit on this spectrum of curiosity? And can being more curious make you a better leader, or make you more successful, or help you address your fears, and all of these kinds of good things. All these things that we should really unpack as part of today's discussion. But maybe the starting point is, how do we actually define curiosity? What is curiosity?
It's funny because I gave a big talk this week for coaching.com.
Oh, okay.
Very first thing I made everybody do was define a couple words. How do you feel? What's the definition for curiosity for you at work, especially? And, it's fun to see everybody's answers. A lot of it is, exploring new things, asking questions, doing things you haven't done in the past. Those have come up a lot. And when I wrote the book, I always saw myself as a very curious person, and I wanted to know why other people weren't curious. And I wanted to just delve into that a little bit more, because I had all these people like Steve Forbes and billionaires on my show, and, everybody's super curious and wonderful and interesting. And then I would teach some of my classes, and some of my students maybe not as interested in looking.
Right.
They want you to give them the fish instead of teach them to fish. And I wanted them to want that. And so I guess I looked at curiosity like everybody else. It's the desire to learn new things and all that. But as I started to work with organizations and give them my curiosity code index and find out what was slowing them down and talk to them about all these things, I really see it so much as getting out of status quo thinking in organizations, because the Blockbusters and the Kodaks and the companies, BlackBerry, that was a great movie I just watched, how they all failed because they stuck with the status quo way of doing things. Because if it worked great in the past, we don't need to explore and look into new ways, because we like those BlackBerry thumb buttons that but then Steve Jobs ate their lunch, right? And so we have to realize that just because something worked in the past, it's not going to necessarily work in the future. So having a strong sales background, I saw the importance of asking questions and all those aspects of curiosity. So of course, it encompasses all those words that everybody typed into the box this week.
What amazingly consistent theme out there, which is what worked in the past won't always work in the future. Right. That doesn't mean we're not going to take some of the positives of the past, or we're changing absolutely everything. But I do believe that in professional sales, particularly over the last 15 or 20 years, there have been significant, meaningful changes that we have to respond and react to. And that's a real challenge in professional sales today, for sure, because you've got well-established, mature folks who have a bit of that Kodak thinking. Yes. I was at Kodak, by the way, at that time. Yeah, it was really interesting time. I got hired into Kodak as my first job, selling photocopiers back in the early 90s. And it was quite interesting because they had this photocopy division that had a professional sales school and competed with Xerox. And they had some technologies that actually did compete quite successfully with Xerox. But you could see that mentality of they just didn't want to disrupt their cash cow.
Right.
So it was always this discussion about the film business. And as you aptly point out, they actually had the patent on digital photography, and they would literally joke about companies like Sony and Agfa and some of these other competitors because they were so minor league in traditional film compared to Kodak, and then they ate their lunch.
Oh, I know. It's just crazy. I've had Jeff Hazlett on the show. I've talked to him. He was the CMO, as you know, of Kodak. And it's a common thing that a lot of companies have had. I mean, they've really had such great success. I mean, Kodak, you couldn't walk into a store without getting a bunch of Kodak film landing on your head because it was so packed everywhere, right?
Right.
It's like that, it's the kind of thing that it's hard to foresee the future of what's going to change. But in sales, what I found what was interesting that has changed so much is the teams are much more popular than when I was a pharmaceutical rep. I started to see a little bit of that when I was leaving. And this is more than 20 years ago than when I was doing that. But I loved having my own territory. I had nobody to bother me. I could do my own thing. And then they go, well, if one person calling on this doctor is getting such great results, let's have two do it. And then they would have me do it instead of every 4 weeks, call on somebody. My counterpart would go every 2 weeks. And so we would split it up. And that works so well. Let's have 4 people. And by the time I left, there was 8 of us calling on this guy or gal. It was a lot, and they got overwhelmed by it. And it was interesting to see, but then I see a lot with my daughter is a big director of marketing and sales for a company called Split. And she's been in sales forever. And I get to see what they do, in some of these teams. I mean, when I was selling loans, they threw you the phone book, said, here, dial for dollars, and now they've got this person gets the lead, that person closes the deal, this person does this. That's what I think is the biggest change in sales since I did it.
Well, you're right. That's a huge change in sales. And that actually came about with Salesforce. So right. Back there was a guy named Aaron Ross who helped grow Salesforce in the early days, and he came to the conclusion that that established sales reps wouldn't do what's called demand generation, or what they used to call cold calling 50 years ago. So he came up with something, the specialist model, where we have people who just do demand generation, right. And they pass the opportunity over to the more mature account executive, because that person's never going to do demand generation. I don't actually agree with that, but they're never going to do demand generation. Yeah. Very famous book called Predictable Revenue. And that kind of triggered this specialist model. And part of this has damaged the sales community. Yeah. That's a different podcast for a different time. Yeah. But that idea, it's interesting, that idea of this isolation as a salesperson as well. I think curiosity comes into play there a little bit too, and a little bit, to a certain extent. One of the things that we're always surprised by in our training is that people actually get benefit from just being a part of the community, even in people who sell for companies in different divisions, different industries, selling different products. There's an amazing amount of consistency in terms of challenges or opportunities, or the importance of the sort of mindset. Right. And so they get real value understanding what different people do. And so you talked about, hey, I enjoyed being alone and kind of being on my own. And then suddenly there's 8 people calling on that poor physician.
Right.
So Diane, in the book, you make these great connections. The book is such a great read. It's so incredibly interesting because you make these connections between curiosity and motivation, curiosity and leadership and engagement and emotional intelligence, all these things we want, success, all these things that we want to know about. But one of the most fascinating points you bring up that's validated by the research is that, and correct me if I've got this wrong, that children, babies, of course, they're all about curiosity. And by the time they're 3, they're asking about 100 questions a day. Mm-hmm. So every, survival is based on curiosity, and they've got this going for them. But by the time they're 12 or 13, that's cut, by 75%, and they're asking very few questions. It's almost like we're the environments are bleeding the curiosity out of these kids as they grow up.
Yeah. And you bring up something that comes up in the Curiosity Code Index, and environment was one of the factors that inhibits curiosity. What was interesting to me was, you mentioned emotional intelligence and some of these other things that we're trying to develop at work. And I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the impact of emotional intelligence on sales performance, actually. And whoa. That's what got me into just the interest of emotional intelligence, which I fell into randomly. I hadn't even heard of emotional intelligence at that time. It was a long time ago, right? And I thought, well, this is a really cool, interesting topic. I had no idea how big this thing was going to explode, right? And as I was writing this, I'm thinking, I like all this assessment stuff because I thought it was really fascinating. I got certified in emotional intelligence tests and Myers-Briggs and whatever was popular at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so, what I learned was emotional intelligence, motivation, all those things you mentioned are all the things people hire me to speak. They'd say, can you speak about soft skills or whatever they called it, the different things. Yeah. And as I started to look at some of these things, I realized that to fix any of those things, you have to fix curiosity first. Curiosity is the spark. And I likened it to baking a cake. You want cake as your outcome, right? If you're baking a cake, that's your goal. You've got ingredients like flour and oil and, eggs, and you're mixing it together and you put it in a pan, you put it in the oven, you want cake. Well, in the business environment, our cake is money, productivity, right? We want that. These are the ingredients: emotional intelligence, motivation, communication, engagement, yes. Innovation. And everybody's working on these things, but nobody's realized that they put it in the oven. The oven's not on. You got to turn on the oven with a spark of curiosity to get cake. So that's how it all kind of ties together. And so that's why I broke those things out into different chapters for that reason.
And let's talk about the spark. So if we've got folks out there listening today that might say, hey, insert, almost like Carol Dweck with growth mindset.
Right.
Hey, in one area of my life, I've got a real growth mindset. I'm a musician. I love learning, watching online videos for drumming. I love getting better. Mm-hmm. I love improving. And when I'm not playing well, I don't see it as a scarlet letter. I just go, okay, this is part of my journey to getting better. I've got to get better. Mm-hmm. Yet in business, I might have this fixed mindset.
Right.
And I'm not open to coaching, and I don't want to learn and develop. And in Carol's book, at one point in time, she says one of the main ways of changing or triggering that growth mindset is actually just understanding the difference between a fixed and growth mindset, and then looking at some part of your life where you have that growth mindset. How, if people are listening today and they say, hey, maybe I have plateaued a little bit, or regarding my curiosity, maybe it has diminished. How do we re-trigger curiosity?
Well, of course, I use Carol Dweck's work and George Land.
Yeah.
Or Ken Robinson's. Both those, the last two have some great TED Talks if you haven't seen them. But, if you look at some of this stuff in George Land's work with NASA, he looked at creativity, which mimics exactly what we see with curiosity. It goes up about age 5 and then tanks, right? We get to be about, in our 30s, we have very little left. So what he said is, we kind of like come up with these great ideas, but at the same time, we over criticize them. And it's like putting on the gas and the brake at the same time. You don't go very far, right? So how do we know, if I'm a musician and I love that, but I just told myself in my head what you were saying, but I don't really, in business setting, I'm not really this, I'm not that. That's our assumptions that we have. That's our voice in our head. Yeah. And when I studied for the Curiosity Code Index, was my main thing that I work with organizations with, right? So I give this assessment, and this is the reason this assessment got so much attention, is because there was nothing that determined these things that hold us back. And one of the things we already talked about a little bit was environment, but there's 4 factors that you can figure out what's holding you back from curiosity. And if you know these things, that's how, like you said, awareness from Carol Dweck. If you recognize these things, then you can move forward. So I spent years studying thousands of people, and this is all peer-reviewed scholarly research, that I had published, because I wanted to not just come up with an assessment that's cute for my website. I wanted something that's going to fix this, right? And so the 4 factors that inhibit curiosity are, the acronym is FATE, F-A-T-E. So you have to recognize how fear, the F, A, the assumptions, which is that voice in your head, T, technology, which is over and underutilization of it, and environment, E, which is everybody with whom you've had contact who's told you you shouldn't like this, or our family all does that, or I don't have time to answer this. So all these things can kind of overlap a little bit. Like you talk about environment. If maybe somebody said, well, maybe your sibling said, well, that's a really stupid thing to do, or you get this. All these people in your life, your boss said, don't come to me with problems unless you have solutions, or somebody said, oh, that's a great question. I'll make you the head of that committee and I'm not going to pay you to do it, but here's more work. Well, all these things have this voice in our head going, well, I don't like that, or I'm not going to do that again. Yeah. And so that leads to fear, right? And we're in the meetings going, I'm not going to suggest anything. Last time they made me the head of that, or I don't want to look stupid. There's all these things. And it was so interesting to me to get it in writing. Like this is what holds you back under fear. Here's what holds you back under assumptions, technology, and environment. So like you said, where you stand as in an emotional intelligence test or an engagement test. And then you then can create kind of a personal SWOT, look at your weaknesses and threats, and then create SMART goals to overcome them. And that's basically the process I go through within organizations with people.
And that's the process you go through. And by the way, if we go online and we do the Curiosity Code Index, is there a tool online that we can self-assess and do these things?
Yes, it's curiositycode.com.
Fantastic. So team, those links will be in the podcast here today, and everybody should take a look. And and take that on. So fear, the acronym was FATE: fear, assumptions, technology, environment. You start to think, and all of these are cognitive biases. Many of these, anyway, at least environment, cognitive biases. A lot of them apply, by the way, to sales.
Oh yeah.
So I absolutely think that environment and these voices you hear in your head. Certainly, when I started, I'm not sure about you, but I wasn't very proud to be in a professional sales role when I started. all my friends who had the worst jobs, looking back, they had the worst jobs in the universe. They were, MBAs who were the lowest level in terms of the financial community, and investment banking, where they just get abused, for years. Then we had lawyers who were articling and just miserable existence. And I'm selling photocopiers into businesses all the time, dealing with people learning about business, but had a real self-esteem issue, likely because of this perception in the universe of what sales is.
Right.
The stereotype from 50 years ago, like Gil from The Simpsons, it just wasn't very good. And by the way, I think that there's still a little bit of that out there.
Well, a long time ago was Willie Loman and, Death of a Salesman. And,
there you go.
Watch Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross. I mean, you watch these things and you go, oh, it sounds awful. But, I believe that everybody should have a sales background to some extent. I mean, it's the most helpful thing. I had Barry Ryan on my show. He teaches curiosity in sales at Stanford. And some of this stuff is really fascinating to see how much sales helps you. For me, the biggest thing that helped me in sales was questioning to develop my empathy, which is a big part of emotional intelligence. And what was interesting, when I worked for AstraZeneca, they actually rated us on our concern for impact. And this was like 1980 when I took the first assessment with them. And you're thinking they were way ahead of their time. I mean, how much I cared about how I came across to other people was huge for them. And I thought, that's such an important part of, with emotional intelligence is your ability to understand yourself and others and those emotions and react appropriately, right? But in sales, if you don't know how you're coming across to other people, that's a big problem. And it's also in sales, you need to develop this empathy to be able to know what your customers even need. And so because it's so complicated, I think sales is, even though it's got that Willie Loman thing to some people, to me, you're bringing in all the money for the company. You're the heart of everything. And I think people are starting to see that this is so important that we need to have people trained and have them understand. Because I have a sales story I share that's mortifying. I had when I was a pharmaceutical rep, like, really young doing this. I mean, I just out of college and I had never sold anything. And I went through their intense training program where I've never had better training in anything in my life. But they're like, you're going to say this, you're going to do that. It's going to be this order. You're going to talk about this product. And so I went through all that training. I mean, it was years of training in some respects, but my first call or so, I'm in a building and it's like a 3-story building. I get up there and I'm in the waiting room and you got to wait for these, it was a guy at that time that I had to call on and you had to wait for him a long time and you're all nervous going, okay, I'm going to say this.
Kidding.
I got to talk about this product and that product. And so I got in front of him finally. And I mean, they told me, you don't know how much they say. This guy's got 5 seconds. He's not going to want to talk to you. You're going to have to do your best, chase him down the hallway, whatever you have to do. Well, for some reason, I was able to sit in an office with him and actually, which was really unusual. And I got, through 3 of the products, all 3. I mean, that was the goal. And no one gets through 3. No one, right? I got through this one and that one. And I walked out of that office. I was so proud of myself, like I had just done the most amazing presentation. And I just
pitched.
Oh, it was wonderful. I closed him. I did everything you're supposed to do, but I had to go get my samples. So I go down and get in the elevator to go down to my car. And as the door's closing, a guy gets on the elevator with me, and I'm such an extrovert, I can't go 3 floors without talking, of course. So I look at him and I go, "So do you work in the building?" And he looks at me so mortified. He goes, "You just sold me your product." It's that same guy.
Because you never looked up.
And look at him. I was so
fantastic.
mad. The worst thing. Oh. I died. I absolutely died. I mean, wouldn't you? Of course. It was the worst sales call you could ever have. I didn't ask him any questions. And I often think about if you hadn't gotten in the elevator, you know, you don't know how bad you are sometimes.
By the way, think of that on your first call. First of all, what a tough lesson to learn, and tough. How spectacular to learn it on your first call.
Yeah.
For the rest of your existence.
Oh, it helped me.
Great. By the way, Diane, you know what? That is what you just described is the biggest change in professional sales in the last 30 years. There was a time where that person on the other side of the table needed you to explain what products were out there.
Right.
The difference now is everybody knows everything. They don't need you to explain, you know, what products and services. So this is a problem. Most people still want to pitch. Yeah. But the reality of it is, this is where curiosity comes in. What they really want to know is, how can you just help me run a better business?
Right.
So that's all so whatever it is you do, can you help us run a better business somehow, or help me achieve the goals and objectives of my division? Or if I'm a doctor, help me run a better practice.
Right.
So that's really where the shift where Daniel Pink, who you interviewed at the end of our podcast, he said, sales is management consulting now. Mm-hmm. So he said it used to be pitching and all that, but all that's going to get taken care of online by AI. But by the way, thanks for sharing that story. We've all got them.
I know you get a real groan from the audience when you share that one in a sales group because it's just awful.
We've all got them. And you've got those things where you were so nervous. Uh-huh. You were so nervous and you did what you'd been taught. Hey, better know my product, better pitch, better keep going and going and going. This is why it's lifelong learning doing this. This is a hard thing to do.
Yeah. It's really, it's a funny aspect to look at how things have changed, as you said that, because I think a lot of people don't ask the kind of questions that they need to ask. And I think, if you're asking back then, you would ask different questions. But again, we're getting on a status quo. You have to know the kinds of things to find out how to help them with their practice. I can remember a doctor I called on. I got better and started asking him questions, and I started painting the picture. They used to teach us to paint the picture. And I'd say, if you use my migraine drug, when your patients come in and they have this horrible headache, they call you in the middle of the night and wake you up because they have, you have to send them to the ER, and they call all this money it's going to cost them, and they're going to have all this they won't, I painted this big picture. And the guy says to me, "I don't care. That comes out of somebody else's budget."
Exactly right.
And I'm like, well, first of all, remind me not to go to you.
Yeah, that's right. You don't really care about your patients. Got it. Awesome.
Yeah, but sometimes painting the picture helps bring out the questions. In another way. That's another way to explore what their pain points are.
Well, it's interesting. I just had this experience, kind of yesterday, where somebody we just had a networking touch point with somebody. And they're an extraordinarily successful individual, and we had a great conversation. But somebody just thought we should chat, and at the end they kind of went, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. Why don't you let us know what you do there?" And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to give too much data here. I don't know anything about your company, so I'm not really going to go too deep. And I sent this note over, and I literally got today just this email with probably 35 points, sort of attacking what I'd sent over. And so somebody, and I just, sent a quick email back going, so, hey, fantastic thoughts. Really look forward to, let's chat live about it. But as soon as you start pitching anything, it's very easy for somebody to come back and go, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this.
Right. You don't know what they even want.
We have no idea what they want. So my email back was gonna go, I think, hey, I agree with all your points. What problem do you think you're trying to solve? You asked for this. But if you don't know what problem we're actually trying to solve, if I don't, then I can't help. I think where your book would be so important for everybody listening, there's a difference between a line of questioning that is just meant to trigger an answer that leads to the problem I solve and me pitching again.
All right.
And by the way, through Dr. Morgan's work, Can You Hear Me? I think the book's called Can You Hear Me? People are always sensing the intent of someone else.
Right.
Consciously, subconsciously, we can tell their intent.
Right.
The second they start to think that, we've got commission breath, a wall goes up.
Yeah.
But you've come across those people that really have that authentic interest in you and your business or what's going on. And so that's the skill to try and cultivate, which is have a unique interest. Really try and understand what's going on. Do your research to earn the right to understand. The outcome down the road might be an opportunity for you. But if you're constantly focusing on trying to figure out how to add value to somebody else or some other business or a buyer, things will work out for you down the road, even if it's not an immediate sale for you. But that's one of these key lessons that is also new in sales. I don't think people actually get that.
Well, I think we learned a lot from the focus on culture and perception and some of the things I wrote about later after my curiosity book. I wrote a book on perception because I thought it was so important what you're talking about to recognize this. And the power of perception and the perception power index is all based on recognizing that perception is a combination of IQ, EQ, emotional quotient, CQ for curiosity quotient, and CQ for cultural quotient. And as you look at all these aspects, sometimes you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes a lot more easily when you recognize perception is a process. My acronym for that is EPIC. It's evaluate, predict, interpret, and correlate to come up with conclusions. And there's so much of our backgrounds and culture, and it doesn't matter if it's religious or female, male, or, all these different factors of how we were raised can impact so much of what we think the other person's thinking. So again, it comes back to the assumptions and the curiosity thing. We just assume that this is their problem. We just assume that all these things without asking. And so it all comes back to asking questions. It all comes back to building that empathy to be able to, and our perspective, because we all kind of sit on this world in a different spot. So I see your Selling Well podcast from this angle, but somebody sitting here might see it from here. And when we think about that, it's so easy for us to assume everybody else is thinking the same thing we're thinking, and they could be on a completely different plane.
Oh, it's such a great point. And by the way, because of the forgetting curve with Hermann Ebbinghaus, we constantly have to reinforce this or re-engage this or recommunicate it. Frankly, whatever it is, whatever conversation we're having, because we're all so busy today, what might resonate and stick to one person at one point in time, particularly say, as you come and see them 3 weeks later, and you think they understand your value proposition to the market and your company and your product, they don't even remember your name.
Right.
So you think, oh, no, we've already been through this. I'm going to tell a very short story, and then I want to lead to, because it leads to curiosity and leadership. And chapter 4 in the book, Curiosity and Leadership. But everybody on this podcast has heard very quickly, I was the worst sales manager ever in the year 2000. Pretty sure in the history of time, there was nobody worse. Because I'd been this, kind of very, very strong superstar salesperson, gets promoted into being a sales manager. I thought it would be Shangri-La. Now I'm responsible for 8 people. All I want to do is tell them exactly what to do all the time. And I want them to do it exactly as I used to do it. So they can't do that. So I'm miserable. They don't want to do that. So they're miserable. And because in big companies, when you perform badly, you keep getting promoted. But now I get promoted to run a division. Within about a year, I got promoted to run a division that I knew nothing about whatsoever. So now I'm managing a team, and every time I'm working with them, they say, here's my situation. What should I do? And all I can do is go, I don't know. What do you think you should do? And then suddenly management became easy, and they were happy, and they were engaged, and they felt empowered. And I started to slowly learn the business.
That's
Tell
awesome.
me a little bit about the chapter curiosity and leadership, some of the connections of these great leaders, what you found there.
Well, leadership was such an interesting thing. When I had Francesca Gino on my show, who's a big Harvard professor, who did the case study for curiosity and HBR article, which I love, and I think everybody should read that. We talked about how leaders think that they encourage curiosity if you research them, a lot of them, and then when you interview the people who work for them, they think not so much, right? So there's a disconnect in leadership. What leaders want to know about curiosity when I work with them is, how does it impact the bottom line? They want to know a lot of that kind of data when I'm talking to from their perspective. And what I think is really interesting now that ChatGPT is such a hot topic, if you type into chat and ask, how does this help leaders? How does this, promote the bottom line to have curiosity? And it almost tells you like, well, it's kind of intuitive, dummy, when it comes back, what it says to you. It's kind of funny. But it does. Of course, it helps with communication. Of course, it helps with emotional intelligence. It gives you all this stuff. But there's not a lot of data out there, which I'd love. Francesca had some for leaders. That we're seeing some of this. But I work with big companies like Novartis, Verizon, LinkedIn, you name it. I speak and go around the world and talk to these companies and give this assessment. And so I get to talk to a lot of leaders, and they all have a different way of promoting curiosity within the workplace. Like at Verizon, they sent me back and I created these videos, these small little teaser videos that they play in their onboarding sessions so that they can share the value of curiosity in a couple minutes from me talking. And then they'd have an employee who was super successful, and they give their story of how they became successful based on their curiosity. So they create these little videos, they play them all throughout all the stores and all their onboarding. So they're sharing the culture of curiosity. And that's just Verizon's way of doing it. Novartis pays 100 hours of education a year to their employees.
Nice.
They all have different things that they do, right? But it's emulating what you want to see if you're a leader. You have to ask the stupid questions. You mentioned Keith Kroc earlier, and I'm on a lot of boards with him. I'm at the Kroc Institute at Purdue. It's a technology awareness kind of company that he's created, and Global Mentor Network. He created him on that one. And so what I loved about Keith is his leadership style. And that's why I asked him to write the forward of the book. And whether he was the CEO at DocuSign or undersecretary in Washington, he's stayed very humble, and he doesn't say he knows everything. He gets these giant boards. When I was at the board at DocuSign, there was like 250 of us, and I'm with sharks and the head of McDonald's, and I'm like, what am I doing here? In a way, but he gets media people, he gets scientists, he gets technology, he gets all these people together, and he doesn't say he knows everything that everybody knows. He says he knows a lot more than he pretends, because this guy's the smartest guy I've ever met. But he'll be very humble about it and say, hey, I hire these people around me that know all this, who are all knowledgeable in these areas. And I think leaders need to recognize you can't know everything, and you don't know what you don't know. And that comes up a lot. So if you surround yourself with great mentorship, you can build your curiosity and utilize everybody else's curiosity to your advantage.
Well, how critically important, what really resonated with me about the chapter, Diane, was all of the amazing leaders, Keith and others that you've interviewed. When they talk about, some of the most important traits on leaders, curiosity ends up being one of the biggest ones. They're not in meetings telling everybody what to do.
No.
As you know, and I know now, but it's a hard learning curve. Nobody capable wants to be told what to do. Generally, nobody wants to be told what to do.
Right.
Generally capable people want autonomy to grow themselves and to achieve. And and to be creative and have flexibility. So no one wants to be told what to do. Even in your earliest days selling for AstraZeneca, you wanted to be left alone.
I did.
That's how you actually phrased it. So I think one of the important things the best leaders are, they ask the right questions to challenge the team and elevate the team, but they do have that core capability and experience and intelligence to assess to a certain degree what's coming back. Because at some point in time, we want to be curious, we want to get facts, but eventually we have to make a decision. And you raise that in the book as well. We can't get paralyzed by curiosity where it's just analysis paralysis.
Right. Yesterday when I was speaking to that group, you reminded me, I had shared a story of Doug Conant and how he turned around Campbell Soup by asking. Yeah, well, he asked, I teach so many courses where they have that case study in there. And it's because he took engagement and drastically improved it. And because everybody was like walking dead going to work. And a lot of it, what he did was ask people about themselves and learn about them. And then he wrote them handwritten notes. He wrote 30,000 of them in his time there. You should see his face when he talks about it. Like it was more than he expected, right? But it completely turned around the culture. So leaders, you can't assume you know the answers to what motivates people, or I've had more people offer me tickets to basketball games as a reward, or dinners at night as a reward for my sales output, but I want to go to bed at 8:00 and I don't that's right. That's not rewarding to me, right? So when you're talking to motivate people, you got to find out what they care about.
Well, by the way, I think we're cut from the same cloth. So yeah, the early to bed, early to rise is the thing. Mm-hmm. It's interesting you talk about something like the note, like what motivates people. Mm-hmm. But even just that note, we've done maybe 100 of these podcasts and just wonderful people. Every conversation is great, just like this one. And I had Stephen Covey booked for 6 weeks out or 8 weeks out or something. Yeah. First of all, I get his book in the mail. Okay. Yeah. So he sends me his book in advance and said, looking for so much to, and there's a nice little, inscription on the front. And I thought, oh, that's nice. Well, Amazon doesn't have to come to the house this week. And then the next thing, a week later, a letter comes in the mail and said, hey, I've been watching what you've been doing. You're really knocking the ball out of the park. I can't wait to have a great conversation. I still have that. So I kept that letter somewhere, but it's just this meaningful impact. Yeah. It's funny in this world where gratitude, you bring it up quite a bit, that gratitude matters so much to millennials and so on and so forth. Right. I'm not getting rid of that letter in the short term. That was such a nice thing. And you can be darn sure I was as prepared as you can ever be for that podcast. So I understand what you're saying. I've had like Tom Hopkins and different people where when I was a kid here in Arizona, Tom Hopkins was like, oh yeah, I wasn't even a kid. I was in college and whatever, but he was so big. And it's so fun to see the Zig Ziglar type people and what their little things that they do. We can learn from so many of these sales gurus out there. I attend a lot. I think a lot of salespeople don't attend enough training that they, I've gone to Tony Robbins things or whatever things, and you go to different things and you get bits and pieces because you can find this piece works for me. Maybe that works for this person. And that's one thing I really liked at pharmaceutical sales is before they hired you, they made you ride in the car with 3 or 4 different salespeople. You spent 3 different days to decide if this is the job for you. Mm-hmm. I remember the first person, she was just like, this is the worst job watching her. I thought, I'm never taking this job. And then the second person, I'm like, this is the best job ever. Because I hated the way she did things. It was like, this is not how I could do this. She was inefficient. It was just awful watching her. And so, but I could take a couple things that she did. And I could take a couple things that this guy did. And I could take, and you take them and you go, oh, okay, this makes it right for me so that I'm most effective. All those folks you talked about, by the way, I love the testimonial from Tom Hopkins. So Tom Hopkins, total legend in professional sales with those same people from 30, 40 years ago, but amazing things. One consistent theme from all of them: become a lifelong learner. Right. No one's a know-it-all. You've got to be a learn-it-all.
And team, by the way, this is why the book is so important. So everybody's heard me, chat about books, but when we're on the podcast, and the joy of the podcast is I have to read these books, to prepare for the podcast. And sometimes I'm just absolutely delighted. And Diane, I got to call it out with cracking the Curiosity Code. This is a fantastic book, folks. So we didn't have time to get into everything, but Diane really makes this very detailed, fact-based, research-based connections between curiosity and motivation, leadership, engagement, intelligence, creativity and innovation, age, or maintaining health. So what's that connection? What holds you back from being curious? So we start as infants where we're nothing but curious, and suddenly over time it diminishes. So how do we re-trigger it? Technology, curiosity, and technology. In chapter 17, that's where we talk about the Curiosity Code Index. Interesting thing to go through. So we'll have the links in this podcast so you can go find it. But this is just a great book, folks. And Diane, thank you for joining the podcast today. What a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, thank you, Mark. This has been so much fun. I love talking to salespeople. I think that this is so important for everybody. And I thoroughly enjoyed the experience here.
Thank you so much. And how do people learn more about you? So we're going to have a few links in the podcast, but what's the easiest way to connect with you?
Well, the easiest way, you can, of course, find me on social media at Dr. Diane Hamilton, and it's just DR for doctor, no dots or spaces or anything. And my website is drdianehamilton.com, but for curiosity, you can go to curiositycode.com, which is part of my main website. So if you go to drdianehamilton.com, you can get there that way as well. The most important thing on the site, I think, is to start with the Curiosity Code Index, because it goes along with the book. But I think that's the most important aspect of how you can develop your curiosity is the Curiosity Code Index. So hope they check that out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diane. And team, thank you. Team, thank you so much for joining today. As always, the intention of the Selling Well podcast is to increase the performance and the professionalism of B2B sales and improve the lives of professional salespeople in doing so. And I know today's conversation with Diane would have helped you in that regard. I also know I can get better at running this podcast, and you're the folks who can tell me how to do it. So if you like this podcast, please like and subscribe it to the Selling Well podcast. That actually really matters to us. But if there's things that we can be doing to make this podcast even more effective for you, please let me know. My email is markcox@inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email that I check. And we love constructive criticism. So send us a note and give us some ideas on how to improve the podcast. Everyone who sends some ideas to us, they actually get a response from me directly. And thank you for doing that. In the meantime, hope everybody continues to have a great time and good luck selling.